They say the scariest monsters don't hide under your bed. They live next door, where polite smiles and wave from across the street. True crime isn't just about violence. It's about the chilling realization that evil can lurk in the most ordinary places. These 5 stories unravel crimes that stunned communities, shattered families, and left behind questions no one can fully answer. What turns a neighbor into a predator, a parent into a killer? Let's begin. The Vanishing Twin. The Franklin twins were local legends in Spokane. Leah and Lisa, identical in appearance but drastically different in temperament, had always been seen as a mystery. 2 sides of the same coin. Teachers described Lisa as bright, empathetic, and calm. Leah, on the other hand, was impulsive, dramatic, and known to fabricate stories. But no one ever imagined how dark things would get. On March 17, 2003, the Franklin household woke to chaos. Leah screamed that Lisa hadn't come home from her evening walk. She told their mother that Lisa had been in a strange mood, muttering about running away. At first, police treated it like a teenage runaway case. The twins were only 16. It wasn't unusual for teens to disappear for a night. But Lisa never came back. Detectives began digging. They questioned friends, teachers, neighbors. Lisa hadn't seemed unhappy. In fact, she had just been accepted into a prestigious summer science program, something she'd dreamed of for years. Her guidance counselor remembered her talking about it with a spark in her eyes just days before. None of her close friends believed she'd leave willingly. When the search turned up nothing after 2 weeks, suspicion quietly shifted to Leah. She gave multiple conflicting accounts of that evening. First, she said Lisa had gone for a walk. Then she claimed Lisa had been in her room and snuck out. She later added that Lisa had received a phone call that upset her, but no such call could be found on the home phone records. It wasn't until an anonymous note arrived at the police station that the investigation took a darker turn. The note read, "Ask Leah about the well. She's been there before." The Franklin family owned a piece of land in the woods outside town, inherited from Leah and Lisa's grandfather. It had a crumbling shed, some rusted tools, and an old, boarded-up well. It had never come up in the investigation because it wasn't listed in the main property records. Police searched the land. Inside the well, beneath a heap of rocks and waterlogged leaves, they found a school backpack. It was Lisa's, her name still visible on the inside flap. In it were 2 notebooks, a bottle of water, and a letter. The letter was addressed to Leah. "You said you hated me because I was always everyone's favorite. I didn't ask to be different from you. I just wanted to be your sister. I hope someday you find peace. I forgive you." The letter read like a goodbye, but also a confession of pain. Under pressure, Leah finally broke. In a police interview recorded weeks later, she admitted to confronting Lisa that night. According to her, it started as a fight, one of many. Leah accused Lisa of trying to be better than her. She said Lisa was always showing her up, stealing the attention. That night, Leah followed her sister into the woods near their family land, intending to scare her. But it escalated. She shoved Lisa. Lisa fell, hit her head on a rock, and didn't get back up. Leah panicked. She dragged Lisa's body to the well and pushed her in. She later returned to cover it with debris and throw in Lisa's backpack. The confession shook the town. Some people blamed Leah's mother, saying she always favored Lisa and turned a blind eye to Leah's issues. Others whispered that Leah had shown signs of darkness for years. In court, Leah's defense team argued that it was a crime of passion, not premeditated. They presented her mental health records, which showed years of untreated borderline personality disorder. Prosecutors countered that Leah had the presence of mind to cover her tracks, move the body, and lie for weeks. Leah was sentenced to 18 years for second-degree manslaughter. She would be eligible for parole in 12. Lisa's funeral drew hundreds. Her former teachers, classmates, even the mayor of Spokane attended. A scholarship fund was set up in her name for young women entering science fields. The case became a chilling example of how jealousy, untreated mental illness, and isolation could brew into something deadly, even between siblings. Years later, one of Lisa's closest friends, described their bond. They used to finish each other's sentences. They knew each other inside out. But maybe that was the danger. Maybe Leah saw Lisa too clearly, and didn't like what it showed her about herself. The substitute teacher. George Wilkins never raised suspicion. At 62, he was the kind of man who brought apples to the front office staff, volunteered to chaperone school dances, and remembered every student's name. As a substitute teacher in Des Moines, Iowa, he was practically a fixture, calm, respectful, and trusted. So when he was arrested in the school parking lot one Thursday morning in 2017 for a murder that took place 3 decades earlier, the shock was seismic. It began with a fluke. In 2016, Iowa state investigators received a federal grant to revisit unsolved cold cases using advanced DNA technology. One of the selected cases was the 1987 murder of a 19-year-old hitchhiker named Andrea Keller. Her body had been found in a ditch along Interstate 35, strangled and with signs of blunt force trauma. The case had gone cold within months. No suspects. No motive. Just a sample of male DNA under her fingernails that didn't match anyone in the system, until now. Using familial DNA analysis, which had become more sophisticated in recent years, analysts found a partial match in a federal database, a man recently arrested for vandalism in Kentucky. He wasn't a suspect, but his DNA partially matched that found on Andrea's body. That led police to dig into his family tree. The connection narrowed to a few names, and one stood out: George Wilkins. Investigators were skeptical at first. Wilkins had no criminal record, no known connection to the victim, and had built a quiet, respectable life. But when detectives discreetly followed him and collected a discarded coffee cup from a diner trash bin, the DNA came back as a perfect match. He was arrested less than a week later. The community was stunned. Many refused to believe it at first. Parents of students signed petitions demanding his release, calling it a mistake. But the evidence was overwhelming. In his mugshot, Wilkins looked the same as he did in the classroom: calm, composed, even gentle. It didn't match the image of a murderer. But that was exactly the point. During interrogation, Wilkins denied everything at first. He said he'd never even been in Missouri, where the murder took place. But after hours of questioning, his story began to fracture. He finally admitted he had picked up a girl, once back in the late 1980s during a road trip to Kansas City. He said she was flirty, that they argued when she wanted to be dropped off, and that he lost control. Investigators quickly learned that Wilkins hadn't always been George Wilkins. His real name was Daniel Rourke. In 1988, just 1 year after Andrea Keller's murder, Rourke legally changed his name in Colorado. At the time, he'd claimed it was due to family issues and starting over after a divorce. The timing, however, was too perfect. It was exactly when Missouri investigators were looking for a man matching his previous description in connection to the murder. There were no fingerprints in the original file, he'd worn gloves, but with the DNA match, false identity, and confession, it was enough to bring charges. But why hadn't he been caught sooner? Because Daniel Rourke had vanished. He'd moved across 4 states, altered his birth record slightly with forged documentation, and applied for teaching jobs under the name George Wilkins. In an era before digital background checks, his past had vanished with him. What emerged was a portrait of a man who had built a second life on top of a terrible secret. He married a woman named Sylvia in 1992, raised 2 stepchildren, and never once hinted at his past. His wife later told the court that she had never seen him violent, never heard him raise his voice. "I still can't believe it," she told reporters. "He was the most peaceful man I've ever known. How could that be the same person?" But it was. Prosecutors called it a textbook case of a predator who got lucky, and stayed lucky for 30 years. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The prosecution leaned heavily on the DNA evidence, the identity change, and his partial confession. The defense attempted to argue that it was a one-time mistake, not a premeditated act, and that Wilkins had been rehabilitated by life. The jury didn't buy it. They found him guilty of second-degree murder. At sentencing, the judge addressed the courtroom. Mr. Wilkins, or Rourke, you didn't just kill a young woman. You robbed a family of answers for 3 decades. You lived a life that Andrea Keller never got to live. He was sentenced to 40 years in prison, eligible for parole after 25. Students at the high school he once taught at still grapple with the shock. The school district quietly updated its hiring protocols. Parents whispered about what could have happened if he hadn't been caught. A small memorial was held for Andrea Keller after the verdict. Her sister placed a photograph on the podium, saying, "For 30 years, we waited for this moment. We didn't forget her. And now the world won't either." Dead ringer. Marissa Klein was well known in her Albuquerque neighborhood. A rising local artist, she sold her abstract paintings at weekend markets and held small exhibitions in downtown galleries. Friendly but private, Marissa lived alone in a modest adobe-style house tucked behind a line of cypress trees. She rarely posted on social media, and those who knew her described her as kind but cautious. That made her sudden murder in the summer of 2010 all the more unsettling. Police were called to her home after neighbors noticed a strong odor and hadn't seen Marissa in days. Inside, they found her body partially covered by a throw blanket. She had been dead for nearly a week. The medical examiner confirmed blunt force trauma to the head. No sign of forced entry. No valuables missing. But something else was wrong. Several of Marissa's personal documents were missing. Her passport, social security card, and birth certificate had all vanished. The investigation took a strange turn when authorities discovered that, in the months before her death, Marissa had been telling friends that someone was watching her. She believed her mail was being tampered with. She even installed a cheap security camera outside her front door, but it had been ripped down sometime before the murder. Police retrieved footage from a nearby gas station and saw something odd, someone using Marissa's credit card to buy groceries. The woman looked like Marissa, but not quite. She had the same curly brown hair, similar build, and wore Marissa's signature large sunglasses. But something in her posture, her movements, seemed different. When they pulled the timestamp and followed up with security footage from a different store 3 blocks away, they found her again. This time, clearer footage revealed the woman's face, and it wasn't Marissa. Her name was Denise Garvey. A woman in her late 30s, Denise had lived just 2 blocks from Marissa for years. They weren't friends, but Marissa had once hired her to help organize a neighborhood yard sale. Denise had a criminal record, nothing violent, mostly petty theft and fraud. She'd served time for impersonating a nurse in 2005. Police searched Denise's apartment and found a chilling collection: dozens of photos of Marissa, sketches of her home layout, stolen mail, and, most disturbing of all, a partially completed ID card with Marissa's name and Denise's photo digitally blended onto it. There were job applications filled out under Marissa's name and even fake emails Denise had sent herself, pretending to be Marissa's assistant. When confronted, Denise denied any wrongdoing. She claimed Marissa had given her permission to use her identity to escape financial troubles. But text records painted a different picture. Marissa had texted a friend 2 weeks before her death, "That woman is creeping me out. I caught her in my yard again. She said she was just admiring the garden. I'm starting to think she wants to be me." Investigators theorized that Denise, envious of Marissa's life, slowly began infiltrating it, copying her clothes, stealing her information, rehearsing her signature. It wasn't the first time Denise had impersonated someone, but it was the first time it had ended in murder. Neighbors recalled seeing Denise wearing clothing nearly identical to Marissa's in the weeks before the murder. One even said she once called out, "Hi, Marissa," by accident, and Denise simply waved back without correcting her. The case reached trial in early 2012. Prosecutors painted Denise as a disturbed woman who had crossed the line from obsession to possession. They argued that she had become so fixated on Marissa that she believed, on some level, she deserved to be her. Denise's defense attorney claimed her mental illness, diagnosed delusional identity disorder, should mitigate her responsibility. They argued she had been spiraling for years and had convinced herself that assuming Marissa's identity was a form of survival, not malice. But the evidence was overwhelming. A hammer with traces of both women's DNA was found in Denise's storage unit. Her fingerprints were on the inside of Marissa's bathroom window. And a series of emails she had written to herself, under both her name and Marissa's, indicated a long-term plan to erase the real Marissa and take over her life. The jury deliberated for 2 days before delivering the verdict: guilty of first-degree murder, identity theft, and burglary. Denise Garvey was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. After the trial, Marissa's younger brother, Evan, spoke publicly. "I always thought stalkers were people who watched from afar. But Denise didn't just want to watch Marissa, she wanted to erase her. She took my sister's life because she thought it would fit her better than her own. That's not just disturbing, it's evil." Marissa's artwork lives on. Her family opened a gallery in her honor, filled with her bold colors and strange shapes, her signature on every corner. A foundation was established in her name to provide therapy and legal support for victims of stalking and identity-based harassment. The case remains one of the most chilling examples in Albuquerque's history, not just because of the crime itself, but because of what it revealed: how someone could, inch by inch, take over another person's life until there was only room for one. The locked trunk. In 1995, the murder of 23-year-old Melanie Price was a tragic but quickly shelved case in Atlanta, Georgia. Found off a remote road near Lake Lanier, her body showed signs of strangulation and bruising, but there was no DNA match, no obvious suspect, and no witnesses. At the time, Melanie had been new to the city, with few connections and an off-the-grid lifestyle. Her killer vanished as quietly as she had arrived. The case went cold. 4 years, her name would only reappear in police folders marked Unsolved. But then came 2021, and an unlikely twist. A true crime YouTuber named Tasha Renee, who had a modest but loyal following, posted a video titled, "What Happened to Melanie Price?" The 27-minute video was part of her Cold Files series, where she reinvestigated old crimes with internet sleuthing and public records. She hadn't expected it to go viral. The video was a hit. Within weeks, over 2 million views. Reddit forums picked up the case, and amateur sleuths began combing through Google Earth images, old newspaper clippings, and public property records. One detail that Tasha emphasized became the fulcrum of the investigation. In the original crime scene photos, there was mention of a trunk-shaped indentation in the ground a few yards from where Melanie's body was found. At the time, police had dismissed it. But Tasha asked a simple question: was something buried there? Inspired, a group of online investigators began digging. Virtually and literally. They pulled up archived satellite photos of the area dating back to 1993. Using subtle differences in terrain and vegetation, they identified a rectangular discoloration near the crime scene, about 6 feet long. It appeared in 1994 and was gone by 1997. That's when things accelerated. One Redditor, a drone hobbyist in Georgia, offered to visit the site. After hiking a mile through the woods, he found something strange: a patch of land with discolored soil and old, rusted metal poking through the surface. He uploaded footage of it to Reddit. It exploded. Police could no longer ignore it. In May 2021, authorities conducted an excavation. Beneath the earth, hidden beneath years of debris, they unearthed a locked steel trunk, severely rusted but intact. Inside were layers of cloth, a rusted belt buckle, a decomposed pair of boots, and bones. The medical examiner confirmed the remains belonged to a missing man named Carter Hall, reported vanished in 1994, a full year before Melanie Price's murder. That discovery cracked open everything. Carter Hall had been Melanie's boyfriend, something only a few people knew back in the early 90s. He was older, in his late 30s, and had a history of domestic abuse in another state. Their relationship was short and rocky. Records showed Carter had a restraining order filed against him just 2 months before his disappearance. The leading theory flipped the original narrative on its head. Police now believed Melanie had killed Carter in self-defense, possibly during a violent altercation, and buried him in the woods. Then, a year later, someone else discovered the body and silenced Melanie to protect their own secrets. The case moved fast after that. Investigators found fingerprints inside the trunk belonging to a man named Glenn Hawthorne, Carter's former co-worker. Hawthorne, now in his 60s and living in Florida, had a minor criminal record and a string of erratic behavior going back decades. But the most damning evidence came from a long-forgotten box of documents found in a county storage unit: old interview tapes, scene notes, and one overlooked detail: a single strand of hair on Melanie's blouse that was never tested. The hair belonged to Glenn. Police believed Glenn had helped Carter hide from the restraining order, or possibly conspired with him. When Carter ended up dead, Glenn feared the body would lead back to him. So, he killed Melanie to eliminate the only person who knew the truth. Glenn was arrested in August 2021. During questioning, he initially denied knowing either Melanie or Carter. But when confronted with the trunk photos and DNA evidence, he said, "I didn't kill nobody. I just helped bury a mistake." It wasn't a confession, but it was enough. He was charged with accessory to murder in Carter Hall's death and first-degree murder in the killing of Melanie Price. At trial, Glenn's defense tried to dismiss the YouTuber-led investigation as junk science and digital paranoia, but the prosecution had the physical evidence: Glenn's fingerprints inside the trunk, the strand of hair, and witness testimony that placed him in the area days before Melanie's body was discovered. The jury took less than a day. Guilty on all counts. Life without parole. Tasha Renee, the YouTuber who started it all, was invited to attend the sentencing hearing. She sat quietly in the back row as Melanie's sister, Stephanie Price, addressed the court. "You never cared about the truth," she told Glenn. "You cared about keeping your name clean. You buried one life and stole another. But not anymore." Stephanie later told reporters, "We never got justice in 1995. But thanks to strangers online, people who never even knew my sister, we finally have peace." The case became a landmark in how digital communities can assist real investigations. It also sparked nationwide interest in revisiting other cold cases with the help of the Internet's collective brain. The locked trunk, once buried and forgotten, now sits in an evidence room, its rusted metal a reminder that the truth doesn't always stay buried forever. The family on Clover Lane. The Carsons looked like the perfect suburban family. Living on Clover Lane in a tidy two-story colonial home in Portland, Oregon, they blended in among neighbors with their manicured lawn, pastel window shutters, and seasonal wreaths on the front door. Brad Carson worked in IT. His wife, Lillian, was a part-time florist. Their two daughters, Chloe and Maddie, went to private school and took piano lessons. They hosted barbecues, donated to the church, smiled in every family photo. That facade shattered in March 2019, when 17-year-old Chloe ran out of the house barefoot and bloody, collapsing in the middle of the street, screaming, "He killed them!" When police arrived minutes later, what they found inside was a nightmare. Lillian and 14-year-old Maddie were dead. Each had been shot in the head while sleeping. Brad Carson was nowhere to be found. There were no signs of forced entry, no signs of struggle, no signs of robbery. Chloe, the sole survivor, told police everything. That night, she said, she woke up to what she thought were firecrackers. When she crept down the hallway, she saw her father standing at the threshold of Maddie's room, holding a gun. He turned and saw Chloe. She froze. He said nothing. Then he walked calmly down the stairs and out the back door. Brad was captured 48 hours later at a rest stop in Idaho. His SUV had been parked beside a dumpster. Inside, police found the murder weapon, a 9mm handgun registered in his name, and a handwritten letter, folded neatly in the glove box. The letter began with, "To anyone who cares." In it, Brad admitted to the murders. He called them necessary. He claimed he had uncovered a great lie, and that the people closest to him were wearing masks. The letter was rambling, paranoid. He mentioned being followed, that his wife was a handler, and that the world was a simulation designed to monitor men like me. It didn't make sense. But it didn't have to. Psychologists later diagnosed Brad with late-onset paranoid schizophrenia. But prosecutors weren't interested in a mental illness defense. They pushed forward with charges of double homicide and attempted murder for aiming the gun at Chloe before walking away. He was deemed fit to stand trial. What emerged during the trial was a story even more chilling than the crime itself. Brad Carson had been planning the murders for nearly 6 months. Evidence from his computer showed late-night searches like how to kill your family painlessly, staging home invasions, and delusional disorders. He'd stopped taking his medication a year prior. He'd also purchased a second, unregistered firearm just 2 weeks before the murders, though it was never used. But the most damning evidence came from a hidden notebook found taped under his workbench in the garage. Page after page detailed his growing obsession with conspiracies, that his wife was spying on him, that Maddie had been replaced by a duplicate, and that Chloe had figured it out, but was still pure. Prosecutors painted Brad not as a man consumed by madness, but one who carefully disguised it. He smiled at PTA meetings, packed school lunches, and built a kill plan with chilling precision. During trial, Chloe testified against her father. Calm and clear, she described that night with terrifying clarity. She told the jury, "My dad used to tuck me in every night. That night, he tucked a gun under his belt." The defense attempted to humanize Brad, presenting a timeline of his mental decline, his growing paranoia, job loss, and isolation. But the jury rejected the insanity plea. Guilty on all counts. Sentenced to life without parole. The court never found a single concrete motive beyond his unraveling mental state. There was no financial strain, no history of abuse, no affair. Just the quiet decay of a man hiding delusion behind a suburban smile. Chloe was placed in the care of her aunt. She changed schools, left Oregon, and disappeared from the public eye, until 2023, when she spoke at a mental health conference in Seattle under a pseudonym. "My father didn't wear a mask," she said. "He wore a face so convincing, even I didn't see what was underneath. And by the time I did, it was too late." The house on Clover Lane was torn down 6 months after the trial. In its place now stands a memorial garden for victims of family violence. Some neighbors still drive past the block and shudder. Not because of what happened inside the Carson home, but because it looked exactly like theirs.